I would like to invite our panelists up. We have a fantastic panel lined up, and I get the enviable position of getting to ask them whatever questions I want. Actually, I cleared the questions with them, but I did make up all the questions I wanted to start with. So I am inviting up Zack. Zack Eckles, the attorney and policy advocate at Ohio Poverty Law Center. Bree Easterling, who I think you guys all know, social justice outreach and organizing specialist for Policy Matters Ohio. Mike Jones, justice housing strategist at NEOC, which I had to learn and I wrote down because I couldn't remember. It's the Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless. That's not that hard, is it? And Representative Darnell Brewer, who serves... Here comes Representative Brewer. Serves in the Ohio House of Representatives. Representative Brewer represents District 18, which I understand you guys probably know better than I do because I'm from St. Paul, but I understand it's Southeast Cleveland.
Southeast Cleveland, a couple of...
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much to our panelists for being here today. These are all folks who have been working one way or another for years on ending or reducing what we call at FFJC, we call it debt-based driver's license suspension. So not necessarily license suspensions for dangerous driving, which might be appropriate, but all of the different ways that people lose their license for payment violations or failing to appear in court, non-driving violations that don't threaten public safety, but that are primarily connected to payment and debt. And these four have been champions on that issue for quite a while. And I would like to start, actually. My first question is going to go to Representative Brewer. I know he's comfortable talking in public because he's a public representative. In your packets, you actually have a handout on a bill that's called House File 29 that Representative Brewer is sponsoring. That means he's the leader on that bill. So we know that you introduced that bill and that would reduce the number of driver's license suspensions that are due to payment issues around child support. A lot of us feel like taking away a driver's license for someone who is struggling to pay child support is a little bit counterproductive. So that may seem obvious to us, but I'm curious how this issue came onto your radar and how you decided to make it a priority.
Thank you. You know, there's two people don't give a microphone to, politicians and preachers. So but it came to fruition with my co-sponsor, Rep. Humphrey, who's from the Franklin County area. And as we sat down and talked about issues within our area, within Franklin County and Coward County, we are very unique when it comes to driver's license suspension. You know, people can go to Coward County judges and ask for driving privileges, but that's not around the state. And as we learned about this, we said, this has to be very helpful, RBO, if we pass, to other counties around the state of Ohio. In addition to that, when you think about it, as we were doing more into this, we found out the systems that deal with child support don't talk to each other as well. So we have an adequate system when it comes to child support in the state of Ohio. This is just one step, you know, in this, like you alluded to. If you're behind your child support, you want me to go work, whether you're male or female, to eradicate this fine and help take care of my child. But you're putting another barrier in place for me to not go to work or education or a doctor's appointment or take my child to a doctor's appointment where you're suspending my driver's license. You know, one of the unique things about this bill is, as we were going through the committee, it was the person on the other side, I'm in the minority, who thought of this as a public safety issue. And it is a public safety issue as you think about it. When you have someone who doesn't have driver's license, always looking over their shoulder, driving into the city or rural areas as well, and you have a police officer who could be using this other resource instead of trying to find someone with their driver's license, it becomes a public safety issue. But this is something that we address not only in Coward County, but Franklin County, but other counties as well. That's how it came to our radar. We just received some words from our constituents, and we decided to take action. And I would say this is one of the rare bills that are sponsored by two Democrats that have made it through the House and is in the Senate.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Representative Brewer, for being a great champion on this.
Yeah, thank you.
My next question is for Zack, because Zack has been working hard on a different but related bill, Senate Bill 37, that also reduces debt-based license suspensions, but in some other areas, reducing or eliminating suspensions for failure to pay court debt, for failure to appear in court. It originally had some insurance-related suspensions that it was addressing, and we'll get to some of those more complexities later. But first, I would just like to ask Zack, so I know you've been convening a coalition. I've had the privilege of sitting in on your coalition calls by Zoom a few times. Where's the momentum for this campaign coming from? How did it get started, and who is driving the campaign for SB 37?
Yeah, so for us, I think the momentum really started kind of at more of the local level, with Cleveland Legal Aid in particular putting together a really fantastic report, the Road to Nowhere report. Yeah, and the Road to Nowhere report really outlines in great detail how these driver's license suspensions and fines and fees are extracting wealth from communities, and centered this issue for us at the state level at OPLC as part of our advocacy. So I think, at least for us, it started with legal aids and local level that, Neighborhood Connections and Policy Matters are doing great work here in Cleveland. And then I think also at the national level, this is the other place where we have a lot of momentum, with Fines and Fees Justice Center being here today. There are 23 other states that have already passed a similar reform to what we're trying to achieve in Senate Bill 37 and House Bill 29. Ohio is really great at being like the 25th state in the country to do something. We'll never be first, we'll never be last, but there are national partners. In addition to fines and fees, we have the ACLU, who regularly attends our coalition calls. We have Americans for Prosperity, who also has supported the bill. So, there are national partners and local partners from across the ideological spectrum that see this as an issue and are coming together to work on it. So it is very encouraging. I think we have a lot of momentum going forward into this lame duck period here in a couple months.
Thank you, Zack. I didn't know this. I didn't know this, a thing about Ohio, how you kind of like to be the 25th state to do things like you don't want to be the front runner, but you don't want to be the last guy either. Is that like something people know about Ohio? Okay, that is news to me. I'm glad to know that. My next question is for Bree. So we've heard Representative Brewer and Zack talk a little bit about these bills at the legislature. They're kind of there playing the inside game, what we call making the sausage sometimes. But I know, because I've talked to you a lot and I know you a little bit, and I know you think it's really important for individuals and families who've been directly impacted by a license suspension to be involved in this campaign, to be part of the decision-making and the advocacy. Can you talk about why you think that's so important?
Yeah, I mean, a short answer is because they're the ones closest to the issue. But to elaborate on that a bit, I feel like, when it comes to individuals and communities that are at the closest to an issue like driver's license suspensions, and you mentioned earlier about different complexities within the bill and things of that nature. Directly impacted individuals have a unique perspective and value to bring to the table when it comes to recognizing the complexities, being able to call out things that may be missed or that are being added to different bills that shouldn't be. And so that having that perspective present when it comes to creating policies that impact those individuals the most, or are currently impacting individuals that are directly impacted, means is even more critical for them to be at the center of creating policy that addresses and solves the issues that they're currently facing.
Yep, that's wonderful. Thanks, Bree. So, Mike, I hope you don't think it's unfair if I ask you two questions in a row, because I know that in addition to being a community activist and community leader who has been working for years to assist people in your community, some of whom have been impacted by the criminal justice system, you are also a person who struggled for years with an intermittently suspended and reinstated and suspended driver's license. And I want to ask you about that. But I think something that we do sometimes is define somebody by a violation that they committed once, maybe many, many years ago. And I definitely don't want to do that, because that's not who people are. So would you first just start by telling us a little bit about who you are, the work that you do, the family that you care about, before we talk about a driver's license suspension and how that impacted the work you care about and your family?
So to add context to this conversation, if y'all could Google Mike Jones Breaking the Cycle, Cleveland, Ohio, if y'all could Google that, just to see like some work that I was doing. And while I was doing all of the work that you'll see on Google, I didn't have a driver's license for 17 years, right? Even though I was doing this work. And so I'm a father of 4. My son is 32. Got a son 23, a son 20, and a daughter 18. I also have a granddaughter 16 and a grandson 8. But I am 21. I'm gonna stick to that. So, like Rep Brewer said, my dad was a preacher, so I can go for a minute. But it was just going through this. It was like embarrassing for me. My kids is my why I stayed home from prison. I did 4.5 years in prison. I got a state and a fed number. And from 2004 to 2021, I didn't have a driver's license, right? And so, as Rep Brewer said, always having to look over your shoulder, putting the car in my, at the time, wife's name. So, they run the place, they run her name. And just being embarrassed, like I couldn't really tell nobody what I was going through because I was in position and doing community work. Like we was doing job fairs, we was doing voter registration affairs, we was mentoring youth, I was doing all kinds of stuff. I was going to Atlanta, I was going to Miami, I was getting flown to Detroit, like doing a bunch of community work. And every time somebody offered to rent me a car, I'm like, no, I drive, because I didn't want them to know what my struggle was. And it all kind of started from child support, right? Then child support, as you mentioned, it's a funny system, right? Because my oldest son is 16, and when I first came home, first of all, when you go to prison, your child support don't stop. They keep charging you your child support, right? So when you come home, you automatically... Yeah, so you automatically come home to a suspended license, right? So, I cleared it up initially, and then I became a semi-truck driver. But if you miss a payment or two, because it take them time to catch up when you get a new job, your license automatically becomes suspended again. So I had no idea that my license was suspended when I got caught driving a semi-truck 30,000 pounds overweight. That's a whole nother story, right? So at the end of the day, my license became suspended again, right? So then 9/11 came and they criminalized people that have felonies again. They took an important document from me, which was my hazmat. So I gave that up. And then as I began driving again, when I got stopped, my license was suspended. So me having been in prison before, I didn't want to go to jail. And so when I went to court, I learned the system to plead guilty, and then I ain't show up, right? So that's another warrant. And so, when I finally cleared my license up, I had like 7 warrants, that I had to clear up. It was just a crazy experience, but it all started with child support. And even though I got custody of my son and got custody of my daughter, I didn't technically get custody because they make it hard for men to get custody, right? All you have to do is fill out a simple change of custody form, but they won't let you do it as an individual. They want you to pay a lawyer $1,500 to do it. And a felon, I just came home from prison for real. I ain't really had no job. I ain't got no money saved. So why am I giving this dude $1,500 to do something I could do? So what they would do is they would dead my child support, but they would make me still pay medical, right? So I got to pay medical on a kid that's staying in my house, and I'm getting care source my damn self, right? So that makes absolutely no sense how they kind of set the system up for you to fail.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. I know. All right. So I warned you I was going to ask you 2 in a row, right? I think a lot of times we think of a license suspension in terms of how it impacts that individual, which of course is the most direct impact, and their family and their kids. But sometimes we don't think about the fact that a driver's license suspension to an individual impacts the community that they would otherwise be interacting with and serving in lots of ways. And so, Mike, I just want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing now and the work that you've done over these last 20 years or so that was a struggle because of the license suspension, and the kinds of people who are benefiting from your work when you can get there.
So like I stated earlier, we was one of the first, Breaking the Cycle was one of the first organizations to do job fairs for people that is formerly incarcerated, right? And ironically, I did have a BMV at my first job fair along with some other resources, right? And like I used to be scared to go to expungement clinics or driver's license clinic because I thought that they would arrest me on the spot. It would just mean like not understanding. So I wouldn't go to them. I would avoid them. People would be like, you can go to this driver's license thing and they'll clear your warrant. I'm like, nah, they might get me. You know what I'm saying? So I wouldn't go to them. So like I was doing community job fairs. I was doing voter registration because people didn't realize that as a felon you could vote. I was doing job readiness classes, teaching people how to get jobs, because a lot of times people come home and they struggle with jobs. And I have an unconventional way of getting employment. Like I worked a lot of good jobs since I came home from prison. Like I worked at Del Monte driving semis. I worked at General Motors. I was second in command at the census. That was what led me to get my license, start my process of getting my license was COVID. COVID probably, I feel, was the best thing that happened for me because they wasn't locking nobody up. And that was my big fear was like, when you got a warrant, what happens is they call it the merry-go-round. So I had a warrant in Chillicothe, a warrant in Columbus, a warrant in Mansfield, a warrant in Cleveland, a warrant in Oakland. I know Jesus, right? Yeah, I had a warrant.
That's right.
I had a warrant like in every place surrounding, Cleveland. And I told her a funny story is that I had a warrant in Oberlin. So what happened in Oberlin is I got caught, the muffler was loud, right? So the police on New Year's Eve let me pay it. They let me go across the street to the ATM and bail myself out of jail. So I told my brother-in-law, who was Caucasian, you got to take me to Oberlin so I can go deal with this situation. So the same police that stopped me recognized the car and stopped us, but he ain't had no license either, right? So they took him out of the car. We was parked like at a hospital. They took him out the car, arrested him, and took me to court. So I'm sitting in court waiting to go before the judge, and they bring him in the courtroom, right? And they take him up before they take me up. So they say, well, what are you here for? And he said, I brought somebody to court. And they like, who you bring to court? And I'm like, and then he pled guilty and they took him to jail. And I was like, nah, I ain't going to jail. So I pled not guilty. So I ran from that warrant in Oberlin from 2006 to 2021. That's my life.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, like, people go through this every day, and you don't really know what people be going through, right? When it comes to this license stuff, like, a lawyer told me that 50% of people in Ohio don't have driver's license, right? That's a large percentage of people in our community that drive every day that don't have driver's license. I almost got my wife a ticket. My wife at the time almost got jail time because when I got stopped one time, how they got this law called wrongful entrustment, right? And are y'all familiar with that?
Yep.
So basically, if somebody you entrust your vehicle to don't have license and they get stopped and the car's in your name, you can go to jail unless you say they stole the car. So at the end of the day, if you say that, then they got a felony, right? So they put you in a situation, like, you see what I'm saying? They try to criminalize it way beyond just the misdemeanor of driving without license. And a lot of people don't know that.
Mike, that is a new one to me. That's a new one to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's some things that happened to me while I was trying to do community work. And I went to jail for one of the warrants, right? And then I got time served on it. But just the whole thing of like constantly having these warrants, constantly every time a police get behind me. I was a real safe driver, like I told her. I would stop on yellow. I got good at seeing the police down the street. Like I could tell you everywhere the police hide. I didn't drive the streets in Cleveland because I didn't want a police officer to get behind me. So I learned how all the highways around this area connect. Like I could teach y'all all the highways go in a circle. You can get anywhere.
I think
highway because I just didn't want to go to jail. It was just, I didn't want the headlines to be like Mike Jones, convicted felon, went to jail because of his license, right?
That's right.
I just didn't want to embarrass the population of people I serve because we already have so many black eyes. And so people that have felony convictions, we be in survival mode for real, right? So like when you trying to survive, like you doing whatever you can to survive. and it don't always make sense. Like I look back now and I'm like, the real motivation for me getting my license for real is my son, who's 20, was going to get his license at 17. And I'm like, I ain't had my license his whole life. And I don't want him to get his license before me. Right? So that was one of the things that motivated me to get my license.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, I talk, because of my work, I talk to lots of people who have a suspended license, and I am convinced that they are the safest drivers on the road for exactly the reason you said, right? So this is why we talk about sometimes suspensions might be appropriate for dangerous driving, but we are not talking about folks who are a public safety hazard. We're talking about mostly very good drivers. I have a question for Representative Brewer, because I think among folks in this room, folks at the table, the people that I work with, it seems obvious that there is so much harm done by these suspensions, whether it's a child support suspension, a failure to pay. These payment-related suspensions do a lot of harm. Seems like it would be a no-brainer to pass your bill, pass SB 37. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamics at the Capitol? Who's behind you? Like, who's with you? And what's the opposition? What do people in the opposition say?
Well, I would say for House Bill 29, we have a lot of support across the aisle. Even the child support agencies are very with us on this bill to help carry it through. And so right now we've made it through the House. It was voted out of the House. I believe unanimously, if I'm mistaken, but it's over in the Senate where it sits in a committee now waiting to be part of that process. As you know, we introduced a bill, proponent, opponent, and in special interest. So we have those 3 hearings, and then even more if it needs to be. SB 37 had plenty of hearings, as you will probably hear Zack talk about with that. And so getting the bill out of a House is very, very hard. Getting it out of the Senate is even harder because of dynamics in the House and in the Senate. I would say this, I'm in the minority. There's a House of 99. I'm one of 32 out of 99, so 67 other are in the other across the aisle. In the Senate, there's 33, 7 are on the Democrat, and the other are Republican. So I always tell people I can count. If I need a bill, I need to make sure I'm creating harmony among all of our members. When it comes to SB 37, I always tell people, because there were some things that Zack probably talked about, and Bree as well, that were taken out of the bill. In Ohio, someone who is convicted of a DUI, driving under suspension, can go to a judge and say, can I have limited driving privilege? But a person who has a financial suspension or a judgment suspension cannot go to a judge and say, hey, can I have driving privileges? And I don't believe that's fair. And I'm glad, some of the best bills and some of the best ideals come from individuals like Joy Carter had me on this, it says, brought me down this road when it comes to driver license suspension. Now, driving with trustment is something, right, we need to look at too, and taking the criminalization out of it as well. So I always say some of the best bills, some of the best ideas come from individuals, because we all think we know. All 99 of us think we know the best. All 33 in this Senate think we know the best. But it's you all, like Bree has said, the people who are close to the issue who have the best solutions.
It just made me think, like, I look, there's 88 counties in Ohio. Yes. And, like, I often say 75 of them don't have less than 3% of minorities in them. Correct. Mm-hmm. So, like, I was going to ask you, does the opposition come because they don't have people in their community affected? Like, most of the time when you think of DUI, you think of that white folks caught them as opposed to any other race. So is that the...
Well, I think what the thing is, Ohio is a very rural county, a very rural state. We don't realize that because we're in an urban area. Our nearest drugstore, our nearest hospital is less than a mile away. When you talk about rural areas, there are their issues. So, right, this is not something that is on their radar. They're looking at other issues versus what it is with driver license suspension. And also, as a stigma, too, they had it in those areas as well. In the urban area, we're very loud and boisterous about it. But when it comes to those urban areas, it's one of those hidden things, and so they try to keep it hidden.
That's a good question, Mike. Mm-hmm. All right, Zack, I'm going to put you in the hot seat here for a minute, because I know SB 37 that you've been working on also has quite a bit of bipartisan support. And yet it started out a big bill that was eliminating suspensions in a lot of different categories. And some of that really good language is still in there, and the bill is still moving, and we're excited about it. But there are categories of suspension that originally would have been eliminated, like for failing to appear in court, that we see as a non-driving violation. It's not a threat to public safety. And some of those categories have been carved out of the bill. Can you talk a little bit, 2 things. What's the opposition? Who wants to take some of these, what we think of as really good provisions, out of the bill? And what are your plans? Or do we have a chance of maybe getting some of those reinstated as the bill moves through the House?
Yeah, so part of what has been taken out of Senate Bill 37 is by design. When this bill was first introduced almost 2 years ago now, like you mentioned, it is bipartisan. Senator Blessing and Senator Ingram. Senator Ingram is a Democrat, Senator Blessing is a Republican, both from the Cincinnati area. They introduced a good bill that I think they introduced with the purpose to pass, and a lot of advocates came to them and said, we love what you're doing, but you can do a lot more with this. And we spent maybe a year working on expanding what Senate Bill 37 covered. Senator Blessing introduced an amended bill that covered, judgment suspensions, security suspensions, failure to appear, failure to pay court fines and fees. So really dramatically expanded the scope of what the bill did. And, it was partly strategic to introduce the perfect bill in advocates' visions that would be comprehensive, and then see who opposes what parts of it, what we can get done easily and quietly, and what will take a lot more work. And that happened. Opposition did come out, in particular to the judgment and security suspensions. The insurance industry did not like that Senate Bill 37 eliminated those suspension types entirely. So on those moving forward, we're going to try and find more process-oriented changes to try to make them less harmful while still retaining the availability of them. Another area where we saw a lot of opposition, like you mentioned, was to the failure to appear suspensions. So at one point, Senate Bill 37 would eliminate all driver's license suspensions for failure to appear for a minor misdemeanor. In Ohio, a minor misdemeanor carries a maximum penalty of a $150 fine. No possibility of jail time, no possibility of prison time, only a $150 fine. They're the type of crimes, I guess, that if you can afford it, you just mail in a check to pay the fine. You never even go to court, and that's it. If you can't afford it, though, you have to take off work probably to get to court at 8 or 9 a.m. on a weekday, and then go stand in front of a judge and work out a payment plan. So, we still believe that those should be treated like any other civil fine or fee, and we should remove driver's license suspensions from those. Unfortunately, there was some opposition to that from the judges. They felt that if we eliminated the driver's license suspensions for failure to appear, then people would not have sufficient motivation to show up to court. We are working on ways to maybe meet them halfway and say, instead of a license suspension, you would have a block on your vehicle registration. That way, your license, you don't get pulled over on the side of the road and surprised that your license is suspended. But when you go to the BMV to renew your vehicle registration, you're talking with an administrative person and you can sort it out in a more peaceful manner. So those are two examples of things that we've taken out of Senate Bill 37 due to opposition, and we still have a lot to work on. There are things that, through the amended version made it in and have stayed in. And the big one is removal of driver's license suspensions for failure to pay a court fine or fee. Current version of Senate Bill 37 removes those suspensions and would do so retroactively and automatically. So if Senate Bill 37 passed as is, if you didn't pay a court fine or fee and your license was suspended, the BMV would automatically lift that suspension, and there would be no reinstatement fees attached to it.
Yeah. That's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Thanks, Zach. Back to Bree. As Zach is talking about some of the opposition and some of the ways that he is trying to get some of these provisions, negotiate for at least some benefits around these areas. I know, because I've done a lot of lobbying myself, that having folks who have a personal story, a personal impact story, come and talk to legislators about how it impacted them, their family, their ability to work, to take care of their kids, that's often the most persuasive thing for legislators. It's not the only thing that's persuasive, but it's one of the things that really works. And it tends to be hard to get folks involved to do that. And I wondered if you talk about what are some of the barriers and some of the rewards for individuals who aren't policy advisors or not lobbyists, they're just regular people, to come in and talk to their legislators about what their experience has been.
Well, to start with, the most obvious barrier would be transportation. Or gotcha, but other barriers. I was just talking to Zack about this earlier with the way our state house is set up, and even down to the hours is contradicting to being open and welcoming community voice. We live in a capitalist society where everybody has to work in order to be able to survive at some capacity, and oftentimes people's work hours conflict with the not only different times of testimony and things of that nature, but even down to just different advocacy events and stuff. This is one of the reasons why we decided to have this event on a Saturday, because most people, if you were to have it during the week, you still wouldn't be able to make it because of their work schedules. Even having it on the weekend, a lot of people are pretty exhausted. We're not even in a post-COVID area, because COVID is still very much active and rapid. But people are more conservative and guarded with their time. So that's the barriers I've noticed, and also a distrust in our government, to where that distrust fuels the lack of motivation to act and to engage in action that would create space for people to have their personal stories heard and acknowledged by the people who have the power to change said policies.
Yeah, thank you. I just think it's important to recognize that there are actual barriers, not a lack of interest, not a lack of stories.
Right. And so one of those things, because I know the second part of that question was what have some of the wins or the successes been? And that I say all that, and those barriers can be frustrating at times, but one of the things is that we have to move at the speed of trust, and we have to move at the speed of community, and that's where persistence comes in. Oftentimes, where having an event like this doesn't necessarily mean that we write the community off, or we write directly impacted individuals off and keep pushing forward in a bill and leaving their voices out. No, we stop. We ought to pause and continue engagement until they feel comfortable, or until we've established enough trust with them to bring them along, and also going to where they are, which we've done time and time again as a coalition with the Drive to Justice Coalition, in creating advisory committees, and partnering with not just other community organizations, but individuals, directly impacted individuals. One of our advisory council members, Miss Hope, has always welcomed me to attend the local community center weekly meeting, and has allowed me to speak there and shed light on this issue of debt-related driver's license suspensions and provide updates on what is going on policy-wise to help address that. So, a lot of the wins that we've seen have been meeting people where they are and establishing relationships and camaraderie organically with the individuals that are directly impacted.
I have one more question for Mike, and then I am going to open it up, and you guys can do the fun job of asking the questions in just a second. But my last question for Mike, and I think it's a really important one, this came up when we were having a conversation kind of preparing for our panel, is that, and you mentioned this a few minutes ago, driver's license suspensions for payment violations, debt-based license suspensions, disproportionately affect communities of color. And that's true not just in Ohio, that's true across the country, that's true in Minnesota, where I live, it's true across the country. Can you talk kind of specifically, because I know you're very knowledgeable about your community, talk about what that impact is, what that means for communities of color here in Cleveland and in Ohio?
Yeah, I think one thing that's uncomfortable for people to talk about, period, is race and how things are enforced. I mean, even in Cleveland area, things are enforced differently on the east side as opposed to the west side. They are enforced differently. Like, I grew up in the suburbs, so I grew up in Oakwood Village. So in cities like Oakwood Village and Maple Heights, they have what they call a mayor's court, right? So a mayor's court is not a court of record. That's not something that they offer for people in the inner city, right? So mayor's court offers a person a second chance. It offers them a chance not to be fined, have their license suspended, or anything negative. It's kind of just like a slap on the wrist. And that's true in a lot of suburban communities around the Cleveland area inside of Cuyahoga County. And as I mentioned earlier, like I don't know this for a fact, but having drove semis through our state of Ohio, I would venture to say that 75 out of the 88 counties in Ohio have less than 3% Black and brown people, right? We live very close in Cleveland to what they call sundown towns, right? So what I mean by that is if you a Black person and you go from Cleveland, Euclid, Willoughby, Mentor, and go to Painesville. Once you get past Painesville to Madison and Ashtabula and Geneva, you went too far. If you go Lorraine and Elyria, and you get to Oberlin and you get to LaGrange, you went too far. Them is places, you know what I'm saying? Like, them places you don't want to get stopped at by the police because you automatically gonna get stopped for DWB, which is driving while Black. You know what I mean? I drive Uber. I get stopped a lot of times in places driving while Black, right? And so the way things are enforced in these communities that's outside of the inner city, and people don't really understand that, right? Because a lot of us in Cleveland that live on the east side, like I said earlier, we scared to go to the west side. People that live on the west side scared to go to the east side, right? So then there's no communication about how things are happening or enforced on different sides of the town, let alone what's being enforced and what people getting away in the suburbs. But me, I go all over. And for me, I talk about, when they ask me, like, how do we solve these problems in the inner city? And it's white folks on the Zoom call, I ask them, what do you do in your neighborhood? Because we need to do that in our neighborhood, right? Because you can't make it seem like y'all don't know the answer to the problem, because we know the answer to the problem, right? And so that's why I asked Rep. Brewer earlier about, like, the driving, the DWI, right? He is correct. I know a lot of people, when I first seen them party plates, they call them the yellow ones, I was mad that I couldn't get a yellow plate because I didn't know that they was for driving while, and matter of fact, I was working with Miss Santina at General Motors, and it was like 7 people that was white that had these party plates, but I didn't know that they was party plates. I was just jealous that I didn't have one, right? And on top of that, I ain't had a license at the time anyway. So, but I'm just saying, like, they get the breaks to be able to drive to work. I don't know many Black folks that get a privilege to drive to work when they get their license suspended, right? So, like, it's just the way things are enforced in communities, and we don't do a lot of talking outside our communities to understand what happens in these other communities where there's not a lot of people of color.
And can I just add to that? That's one of the reasons why, like, earlier I brought up the notion around restoration, right? Because what we're talking about is a systemically and strategic issue that strategically impacts Black and brown Ohioans disproportionately from our other neighbors. And so when it comes to eliminating driver's license suspensions and having like a comprehensive bill, as we did initially, like it's about restoring communities and trying to take a step towards making communities whole and making individuals whole from intentional harm that has been done, because the rigorous process that policies, that bills and policies have to go through lets me know that this was not a mistake.
That's right.
This was not a misstep in a policy framework. This was done intentionally, just as intentionally as redlining. And so when we talk about making community whole or trying to move forward, cohesively with as communities, with systems, you can't move forward without rectifying the harm that has been done first. And eliminating driver's license suspensions is only one component, right? Like eliminating driver's license suspensions is only one component of fines and fees. Like I said earlier, we have cash bail, we have public defender fees, we have all these different fines that are a bit more complex, but still have been put in place to intentionally, disproportionately harm and extract economic value and resources from Black Ohioans, especially. And so I think that restoration piece is just as critical and acknowledging as everything else, because this is a policy that was intentionally put in place to cause the harm that it has been causing.
I'll just say this real quick before she open it up. People was telling Black folks to go out to Solon and get a job, right? They got a lot of money. They're making a lot of money out in Solon. Go to Solon. Solon police would go in each job parking lot and run plates.
They have the
people, and then they would arrest people for having suspended license, not having insurance, and most of them was Black folks. So you would go to Solon and end up in court, and you trying to provide a way for your family.
I'm going to say let's finish this. Let's continue these conversations over lunch. I'd love to have a round of applause for our fantastic panel. Yeah!